This stick was standing by the door with a little tag on it that said, "Use me." I suspect that was my daughter Ethel's sense of humor. She's the one that keeps a chronicle of what I say and what I do to the best of her ability. And as you see, it's not particularly a very big stick because she likes to deflate my ego a bit. But in honor of Ethel, I shall use the stick. But is this not a marvel? Do we not live in a time of wonders? Wow! Think back, think back. 100 years, 1809. We had just barely the steam engine. I believe President Jefferson went down to see it operate. Robert Polk spoke there. We did not have at that time even the telegraph. All we had was our dear Benjamin Franklin having flown to Connington with the key in the storm. And look at where we are today. Thanks to Mr. Eaton Smith, Mr. Kodak, we now have the wonders of pictures, even moving pictures. Bully, a time of wonder, and the potential for even more wonders to come. It is fine to look back, and the present is with us also. But one must always look to the future. Let me see. You young man, what's your name?
Brian.
Brian, glad to meet you, Brian. I need a favor from you. Do you see that clock? All right, it is 2 minutes after noon. When that reaches 2 minutes after 12:30, and I am still nattering on about things before my presidency, your job is to leap up and say, "Mr. President, hurry up." Excellent, excellent. Bully. Marvelous. My parents, Theodore Roosevelt Sr., still today the greatest man I've ever met. He was of Dutch origin, coming over here originally, the family did back in the 1600s, basing themselves in New York, but somewhere along the line, he ended up with a Georgia peach. Fine on the mark. I actually had 2 uncles who served as generals in the Confederate Army. One of my earliest memories. This was our home in New York. President Lincoln's funeral procession in 1865. Whoever the photographer was, of this picture, he is carefully circled right here, that window, because I am at that window at age 7, having been born October 27, 1858. Now, with me in that window was my brother Elliot, who later on married and provided me with a niece Eleanor, who I'll speak more about later, as well as my brother's tragic story. But also with me was my childhood friend Edith Carroll. Now Edith Carroll and I grew up together, we played together, and everybody assumed that we would marry. But then I went to Harvard. Now that's me, approximately age 7, approximately the time I looked out that window, and I was a sickly lad. I had asthma, that's why I talk in this hoarse voice today. My eyes were bad. I carry 6 pairs of these with me wherever I go. Because a sir, and you would give Alan if my glasses were off. My father took me in hand. He called me in. He said, Theodore, you can sit back and feel sorry for yourself, or you can make something of yourself, and I did. I worked hard, to the point where by the time I got to Harvard in 1876, I was able to compete and be a champion boxer. I have a story later as somebody who underestimated me, and this stood me in good stead. But I lived a strenuous life. You must be active, or you will die. Well, you will die anyway, but hopefully later than sooner. Later on, when I became relatively well known, the press used the fact that I was a boxer to indicate my approach to politics. Speak softly, carry a big stick. Or a pair of boxing gloves. Edith Carroll and I had a falling out, and I met Alice Lee. Alice was sweet, and we had a daughter whom we named Alice. In 1882, my daughter Alice was born, and the next day, sweet Alice Lee died. Not only that, on that same day, my mother died. I was quite distraught. I left Alice with my sister, Mammy, and I went out west. I went out west to be a cowboy. I'd already gone previously and purchased a ranch out there in the Dakota Territory. This is the ranch. When I got there, I put my brand upon the logs, and I became a cowboy. Not overnight, mind you. I wrote about my experiences in the West a number of times. Stories of the Great West. I'd already written several books. My first one was The Naval War of 1812, which I believe they still use at the Naval Academy. I wrote about the West. When I arrived in the West, I was dressed as any proper New York gentleman would be dressed. So to speak, totally unsuitable for the environment in which I now found myself. I neither drink alcoholic beverages nor do I smoke. I do not believe that anything should be put into your body that harms you physically or harms you mentally. To me, that only makes sense. So I walked into a bar in the Dakotas, a saloon, and I walked up to the bar and I said, "Barkeep, I would like some sarsaparilla," which, as you might imagine, was precisely the wrong thing to say. There was, at that time in that saloon, a gentleman by the name, and I use the term loosely, by the name of Red, who was approximately 6'4" tall. I am not. Red, thinking he had an easy mark, came over and he said, slapped me on the back, and he said, "Oh, Four Eyes is going to buy drinks for the house." I pretended I was scared. I I crouched down and I whimpered a little bit. And then I came up. I laid Red flat out on the floor. I stepped over him to the bar, turned and faced the people in the bar and said, I believe old Four Eyes will buy drinks for the house. It worked. But I worked hard too. I rode the range 100 miles a day. The cowboys did not know what to make of me, for as I rode the range, I would often be reading. I read approximately 3 books a day, and they did not know what to make of me because of that. But they knew that I worked as hard as they did and harder than they did, and so I earned their respect. One time, one of our boats was stolen, for we were on a river, and we set out to hunt down these people who stole it. And after various times, we caught them. Now, the reward out for these men was to take them dead or alive. And it would certainly have been easier to simply shoot them right there and bring the dead bodies back. But what were we out on the frontier for? The frontier would not always be the frontier, would it? But if it was not going to always be the frontier, we had to make it a civilized place. So I insisted that we bring them back alive to stand trial, which they did. By the time my time in the West was over, I was being talked about as the first governor of North Dakota. But I've been back east, and I thought to myself, what do I want to do? I had a child. I had responsibility, and I wanted to do things. I do not like to spit back my own words. So, if somebody would like to read this, I put some of what I said down on this card, on these cards. So if I have somebody who would like to read,
I put myself in the way of things happening, and they happened. During my years of service in the legislature, I worked on a simple philosophy. Personal character and initiative are the prime requisites in political and social life.
Bully, thank you. I put myself in the way of things happening. All of us have potential for greatness. It may be greatness in different ways, but potential is always there. Some people never utilize that potential because they wait for things to happen to them. I decided to put myself in the way of things happening. And what better way to put myself in the way of things happening than to go into politics? Oh, did I set off some fireworks by doing that? Gentlemen of my station, I was told, did not go into politics. And they were shocked. My family was shocked. But that was where things were happening. So I ran for the State Assembly of New York. I served 3 terms in the State Assembly of New York. I became Civil Service Commissioner, eventually Police Commissioner of New York City. And along the way, I married my childhood sweetheart. Edith Carroll had waited for me. God bless her soul. Edith. More about Edith later. But Edith had waited for me and we married. You'll meet my family later. And she had no qualms about me convened in the assembly, she stood behind me, backed me up, helped me. I could not have done it without her. This is just amazing. This is my family, taken just a few years ago in 1905. Quinty, my youngest. And of course, Ted, my oldest. Kermit. Alice. Somebody once asked me about Alice. I said, I can be President of the United States, or I can control Alice. I cannot possibly do both. Again, more about Alice later. She was equally straightforward about me. Her favorite line about me, as I learned later, was, my father wants to be the bride at every funeral, the corpse at the bride at every wedding, the corpse at every funeral, and the baby at every christening. This may be some truth. Archie, Edith, and Ethel of the Stick. Police Commissioner of New York City. Now, when I took on that job, the police department of New York City was totally corrupt. Officers were taking bribes, they were loitering, they were sleeping on the job. I did what no other police commissioner had done before me. I went on what the presses like to call my midnight rambles. I walked the streets of New York. My officers would never know when I would show up. If you were sleeping on the job, would you like your boss to come up behind you and tap you on the shoulder? Absolutely not. Bully times, bully. We cleaned up New York, at least the police department of New York City. We did not clean up New York altogether, as I'll come to later. William McKinley, who ran for President of the United States in 1896. Now, William McKinley was the last President of the United States to have served in the Civil War. But by the time we got to 1896, William McKinley had a wife who was sickly, and he was campaigning against William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan was a young man and full of vim and vigor and out onto the campaign trail, and they needed somebody to go out and match William Jennings Bryan, and they came to me. That is what I looked like at the time. I went out and matched Bryan, gesture for gesture, fiery speech for fiery speech, while the President stayed home in Canton, Ohio, and sat on his front porch with his lovely wife and let the press come to him. The combination of myself and the President won him the election. I expected great things. More about these two. I expected great things. In fact, does anybody remember what I said my first book was about? Naval War of 1812. I had always had a fascination with the Navy. I wanted to be the Secretary of the Navy. But this man, Marcus Hanna was President McKinley's closest friend and advisor. Marcus Hanna did not trust me. He said that I might do something impulsive, something that would make waves, which I thought was ironic because I was dealing with waves with the Navy. So I was not given the position of Secretary of the Navy. Oh no, I was made Assistant Secretary of the Navy to a man by the name of John D. Long. And what I always said about John D. Long was that he took a long time to do anything. And I was champing at the bit. The Navy had started to be upgraded after the doldrums that had fallen into after the Civil War by Chester A. Arthur. We had begun to build up a fleet, but what was it doing? It was sitting there. And where was our future? It was beginning to look like our future was in Asia. And John D. Long knew nothing about that. So, over a period of time, I had planted in the mind of John D. Long the idea that he needed to take a day off. He needed to go out with his family on a picnic. He needed to go someplace where nobody could contact him. And of course, when the Secretary of the Navy is away, who's in charge? In the one day that John D. Long was absent from the Navy Department, I sent this ship the USS Olympia to Hong Kong, where our fleet, such as it was moored because we did not have our own harbor in Civic at that time. I ordered him to prepare it for war. I ordered him to prepare it for war because I had also picked a young man by the name of Dewey, George Dewey, and I had promoted him over the heads of a number of officers who were ahead of him on the seniority list. Oh, the ruckus when John D. Long got back over that. But I had sent Dewey out to California to take command of the Olympia and take it out to Hong Kong, and in the event of war, to proceed from Hong Kong to the Philippines, because I was firmly convinced that we were about to go to war with Spain. February 15th, 1898, does that ring a bell for anybody? In February 15th, 1898, the USS Battleship Maine was blown up in Havana Harbor. Was it the Spanish? At the time, we all thought so. I, more than anything, I urged McKinley at that particular time that we needed to do something. Things were happening, and we were sitting. I made a comment then about President McKinley. Because he was the President of the United States, and I do not want to speak ill of the President of the United States, because if I speak ill of Presidents of the United States in the past, what can I expect of future Presidents of the United States? So, would somebody like to read what I said about President McKinley? Excellent, excellent.
McKinley has no more backbone than a chocolate eclair.
And he was true. It was true. McKinley sat on his front porch. It didn't matter that it was the White House front porch at this particular time, and did nothing until his hand was forced. And we went to war. And when we went to war, guess who was totally unprepared for it? As I found when I saw it. It was the Army. Guess who was totally prepared for war? It was the Navy. Commodore, later Admiral Dewey, sailed from Hong Kong, receiving the declaration of war, proceeded to Manila Bay. The Spanish fleet was sitting there with not even steam up and was annihilated. The Navy continued to perform admirably during the war. Unfortunately, not so much the Army. But I got together, resigned as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, got together with my friend, Leonard Wood, and we formed the first U.S. Volunteer Cavalry, which later became known as
Rough Riders.
the Rough Riders, yes. Leonard, I'm afraid, ended up not getting the press that he deserved, while I got probably more press than I did deserve. This is the USS Olympia. More about that one later. Here I am in Cuba. Now notice that I am not as hefty in this picture as I am now. I was young. I was ready to do things. General William Shafter. William Shafter weighed over 400 pounds. There's a picture, which I don't have in this, to show you that where he completely engulfed the mule that he was sitting on. All you could see was the mule's head, where Shafter's, there are ladies present. Our cavalry was in charge of General Joseph Wheeler. Joseph Wheeler, who had been a Confederate cavalry officer, and upon leading a charge on the Spanish in Cuba, thundered down the hill saying, "Come on, boys, let's get those damn Yankees." Who did that leave it up to? This is not how the Battle of San Juan Hill happened. For one thing, we did not have our horses. There's a whole story connected with why we did not have our horses. Suffice it to say, horses cannot swim. Or at least when they swim, they only swim in the direction that they fall into the water. If you want to ask me about that later, I'll go into that. No, so we were mostly unmounted. We were held down at the base of San Juan Hill by Spanish gunfire, and prior to the Rough Riders going up the hill, the 8th Colored Cavalry went up. And it was the 8th Colored Cavalry that bore the brunt of the fire and the casualties. As I saw the 8th start to go up, I rose up and said, "Come on, boys," and we went up. Now, why am I posed here instead of the 8th Colored Cavalry? Because I asked, how come you are not giving credit to the 8th Colored Cavalry? And I was told, nobody wants to hear about colored troops. I did something. I came back from the Spanish War and was treated as a hero. I was actually nominated for the Congressional Medal of Honor, which I did not receive. You can ask me about that later also. But because I was somewhat of a hero, George, Dewey, and I, they asked me to run for governor of the state of New York, which I did. And at that point, I came into conflict with this man, Tom Platt. Tom Platt was the boss of New York, and he and I did not see eye to eye on reform. Tom Platt knew that it would be useless to attack me directly, so what he did was in 1900, he pushed me forward as vice president. I once again campaigned with William McKinley, but this time as his vice president. Tom Platt figured that once I was vice president, I would sit in Washington and do exactly nothing, because that was the lot of vice presidents. I was being put on the shelf. Well, I have something to say about that. Would like to read that book for me. You're about to leap up, aren't you? I'll let you read it.
If I have been put on the shelf, my enemies will find that I can make a cheerful place of abode.
And that was true. I still believed in making things happen, putting myself in the way of things happening. Fortunately, that was, and unfortunately, that was not to be put to the test. On September 6, 1901, William McKinley was shot. On September 14th, he died, and at the age of 42, I became the youngest president of the United States. Now, don't get me wrong, I would not have asked for that to happen. Mark Hanna proved to be right. Because Mark Hanna said this, and I need an adult to read this.
Doesn't anybody realize there's only one life between the presidency and that damn cowboy?
Mark Hanna did not last long in my administration. President of the United States. Can there be anything else greater than that job to put me in the way of things happening?
Mr. President, hurry up.
Yes, and I've started on my presidency. Thank you, thank you. Got a mollycoddle there. I did many things as president in the last 8 years. Most of my critics like to overblow what I've done. The policemen of the Caribbean. The United States now encompassed a worldwide field of endeavor. Contrary to what my critics say, we did not have an American empire. We had territories for which we had to look out. We now have a presence in the Pacific. We now have dealings with Central and South America. Somebody had to do it. The United States of America. Speak softly, thank you, Uncle, and carry a big stick. Bigger next time. Then there was this. I abhor the name Teddy. When I was a young man, I got the nickname TD. And my friends either called me TD or they called me Theodore. Sometimes I'll put up with TR. I do not like Teddy. And yet, what was I faced with? Because I refused to shoot a bear cub. Now, what is sporty about shooting a bear cub? If you shoot a full-grown bear, it is most likely bigger than you, is it not? people that are smaller than you are, that are smaller and weaker than you are? Bully, right? So I was taught about to be a bully. For me, bully extends to the exclamation. So yes, I spared this bear cub. And look what we have. I suspect that as my reputation goes forward into the future, I am not going to be able to avoid the name Teddy. So popular did these become that they were extended into books. I have them. You can look at it later on if you wish. In it, the Roosevelt Bears, Teddy B and Teddy G, take a world tour. They go to meet the King of England, the Kaiser of Germany, and the Tsar of Russia. Portents for the future. We lived in an age when monarchs actually did rule. When the Tsar could say, like the Queen of Hearts and Alice, off with his head, and it was done. And the Kaiser had only slightly less power. The King of England was a constitutional monarch, but still wielded a great deal of power. The only other democracy, republic, was France. Questionable. So it was up to us. The Roosevelt Bears. They wrote songs about me, music about me. To tell you the truth, I've never heard that. But I put it up there to illustrate that I was probably more in the public eye than any president up until that time, to my time. Certainly I didn't sit on my front porch like the chocolate eclair. One of the things that came out of our war with Spain was the victory at the Battle of Santiago Bay. Now that victory in large measure was assured by this ship, the USS Battleship Oregon, which was based at the start of the war in San Francisco. The Oregon traveled from San Francisco down around Cape Good Hope all the way up the East Coast and arrived at Santiago Bay the day before Admiral Cervera's fleet decided to come out of hiding and bring us to battle. It was the Oregon, with its 12-inch guns, that caught Admiral Cervera's flagship and sunk it, making sure that we had eliminated the entire Spanish fleet. How much better would it be if we could cut that trip in half? Now, it's been said about me that I took Panama. Well, what would you have had me done? Should I have gone to Congress and talked about how the Colombian rebels wanted to form their own country? Congress would have given us several good speeches and done nothing. One hopes that in the future that will not be the case. I went to Panama. take Edith with me. I was the first president to leave the country during office. They wanted to give me a gold-plated shovel. Now, we live in an age of wonders, do we not? I said I would use a shovel, a steam shovel. It was a bully time. Did I take Panama? I have to give the Navy credit. I have to give the Panamanian rebels credit. But we have a canal. It wasn't all serious work. Well, Alice. I got to give my daughter in marriage in the White House. She married Nicholas Longworth. Nikki. Nikki is more about Nikki later. More about Alice later. Giving away my daughter. I also, although not in the White House, I also gave my brother's daughter, my niece Eleanor, hand in marriage while I was president, to my fifth cousin, Franklin Roosevelt. I believe this is Archie and Quentin. We didn't have much of a Secret Service at that time. We basically used the Washington, D.C. Police Corps, but they detailed several police to me as, and here is Archie giving the salute. Archie has always been the most genial and friendly of my children, probably the least difficult to manage. If you wanted a friend, go to Archie. Oh, more about that. Ted with a macaw. I am, if I do say so myself, an expert on birds. When I was growing up, the wonders of nature were always before me. I loved animals. I still do. People say, how can you love animals and hunt them like I do? I don't hunt animals that are smaller than me. But I loved animals, and I became an expert on birds. Today, when the Smithsonian Institute has a question about birds, they send to me at the White House. I answer. All my children love animals. They all collected them. They had ponies and birds and dogs. And Alice also had a snake, even. It would be Alice that had the snake. As you might guess, with my busy schedule, I was not home a lot. I would write to my children. This is a letter that I wrote to Ethel. I wrote to Ethel explaining what we would be doing when I didn't get home. That we would be playing games, we would be playing with her pony, we would be playing tennis, and oh, did we have a time. Those times when I didn't get home and I didn't got to interact with my children. Excellent times, excellent times. And then, of course, there was the seventh child in the family. Somebody want to read this one? It's short.
You must remember that the custom is about 6.
That was from the press. I don't deny it. Presidency is a bully pulpit, and I had fun. I wonder if I shall live to regret what I said in 1904, that I would only run for 2 terms, that I would only serve 2 terms. Conservation. When I was in the West, I watched as from the windows of trains, people with rifles shot buffalo, till the buffalo was almost extinct. I watched timbermen cut down acres and acres and acres of trees with no thought of replacing them. And I determined that as president, I would do something about that. And so I brought with me Gifford Pinchot. And together, Pinchot and I created the U.S. Forest Service. We expanded the National Park System. We left a legacy for people. Pinchot, I don't know who this fellow is that he's with right here right now. Two things came together to cause me to invite Booker T. Washington to the White House for lunch. One of them was the nagging thought in the back of my mind that still those colored troops that charged first up San Juan Hill had not gotten the credit that they deserved. Secondly, I wanted to teach a little lesson to Southern Democrats. They didn't like me anyway, and I could live without them. You should have heard the uproar. I was to be impeached. I was to be taken out and hung. I was the Antichrist. Hopefully, in the future, we will be able to move toward a society where it is character that counts, and not the color of a person's skin, or for that matter, their gender. In 1905, I brokered peace between Russia and Japan in the Russo-Japanese War. I won the Nobel Peace Prize for that. I, who so many of my opponents had labeled a warmonger, a jingoist, I won the Nobel Peace Prize. Peace is better than war. Is there anybody who would disagree with that? But sometimes you have to fight. If you have to fight, fight for what is right and fight to win. If you're not going to fight to win, don't fight. Avoid fighting if you can. Speak softly. Carry the big stick. Yes, Ethel, I'm using it again. My greatest achievement? Two of these. About peace. Give peace a chance. Somebody made a song. Excellent, excellent.
Peace is not the end. Righteousness is not the end. If I must choose between righteousness and peace, I choose righteousness.
And one more. Anyone? All right.
In my own opinion, the most important service that I rendered to peace was the voyage of the battle fleet around the world.
I may have miscalculated there. What happened was Our fleet consisted of 21 ships. Or so, after our fleet visited a particular harbor, the fleets of His Majesty the King of England, which numbered 42 ships, pulled into that same harbor. I think the British were trying to make the point that Britannia rules the waves. And I will concede that for now, but only for now. Well, you may very well be the last group that I talk to, because tomorrow, my good friend Bill Taft will be sworn in as President of the United States. Story about Bill Taft. As we've seen today, you notice that it was a preponderance of the fair sex who volunteered to read. If anyone denies that women deserve the right to vote, let them take a lesson from Mrs. Taft. I called Bill into the White House. He came with his lovely wife. And I said, Bill, you can either be President of the United States or the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. At the same time, Bill said, Chief Justice. Mrs. Taft said, President. Who's my successor? Heaven help us if we make the women angry. Well, then, it's been a booty ride.
Oh.
My name is Bob Dawson. I was a history teacher for many, many years. I'm leaving President Roosevelt at the end of his term of office as president because that's what this was booked for, that you were having lunch with the president. However, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to carry on for the rest of his life for about 10 minutes, and then I'll take questions. And if anybody wants pictures, I'll stand over there with Ethel's stick. When I was out of office, or when Teddy was out of office, he didn't let any grass grow under his feet. He immediately embarked on a trip to Africa where he and Kermit were out hunting big game. He traveled all over the world. He met, in this time when he was no longer the president emeritus, he met with the King of England, he met with the Kaiser, he traveled all over. I don't think he actually met with the Tsar. But he became a world traveler, went big game hunting, went up in an airplane, first president to fly. He was also the first president to go underwater in a submarine. He quickly became enchanted with President Taft. They had been best friends for a long, long time. This put a rift between them. If you know anything about Adams and Jefferson, it was the same thing that happened with Adams and Jefferson. Unfortunately for Teddy, Adams and Jefferson got back together in the years before their mutual death. Teddy and Taft did not. But Teddy challenged Taft for the Republican nomination in 1912, even though Teddy won, and I'm calling Teddy because that's what we do today. He would probably be hitting me about the head. But even though he won all of the primaries, he was still not given the nomination. People like Boss Platt that you saw, and Mark Hanna was still around, and they controlled the Republican Party, and they secured the nomination for Taft. At that point, Roosevelt broke away from the Republican Party and became the candidate of the Progressive Party, saying, "I'm as strong as a bull moose." And so it became known as the Bull Moose Party. Teddy campaigned on horseback. I think this is him with his trademark smile out west. But he also campaigned by automobile. Here, this is Teddy Roosevelt in Milwaukee. In Milwaukee, he was shot while speaking. He spoke for 90 minutes with a bullet lodged in his chest. The bullet was never taken out. Kind of reminds me of the way of President Reagan. When Reagan was shot and they were carrying him into the operating room, President Reagan looked up and said, "I hope you guys are all Republicans." It's that same spirit. Same spirit. Teddy was defeated. He came in second, though. Taft came in a distant third. Woodrow Wilson became the President of the United States. And Teddy made one last trip. I had to go. It was my last chance to be a boy. He went to Brazil and explored the River of Dawson that nobody had explored before. He almost died. Kermit was with him again. He begged Kermit and the rest to leave him. It was an incredibly difficult and incredibly dangerous trip. And it probably put him on the road to death with ill health. Maybe he never recovered completely from the fever. Then came World War I. Those three emperors, the king and the Kaiser and the Tsar, do you know they were all related? They were all grandsons of Queen Victoria. All cousins. They went to war in 1914. Same time when Teddy was going down there. When the Lusitania was sunk in 1915, Teddy determined that the United States should go to war, and he peppered Congress and the President to do so immediately. But Wilson was in the middle of the campaign in 1916, running on the platform that he kept us out of. And Teddy probably, I don't know if he did, but he probably would have called Wilson somebody who, again, like McKinley, has as much backbone as Chocolate declared. In 1917, when war actually was declared, he volunteered again. He went to the president and offered to raise troops and actually go to France to fight. Wilson, who said, "I don't want a Republican over there getting all the glory, and I don't want to have to worry about protecting him. I don't want to be responsible if the president of the 20th century gets killed," and he denied him the chance to do that. All of the Roosevelt children, with the exception of Alice, went and participated in the war. The four boys were soldiers in the war, and Ethel went and was a nurse over in France. In fact, Ethel was there longer than any of the boys as a nurse. Unfortunately, Theodore's youngest son, Quentin, was killed. Quentin had gone in. Quentin was, he was the James Dean of the family. He was the live fast, die young, good-looking corpse. And he went in, because of that, he went into the air service. He was shot down out of air patrol over German territory, I believe July 6, 1918. Theodore Sr., his father, was devastated. The Germans actually buried him the cross in the picture was made from pieces of his airplane, and they honored him. The Germans honored him as being an honorable foe. I think one of them said he fought like a madman. Drove his plane like a madman. Actually, the Germans still had a lot of respect for Teddy Roosevelt, even during World War I. I found that amazing. Less than a year later, President Theodore Roosevelt was dead. He died on January 6, 1919. He was being talked about as the Republican candidate for president in 1920. He was only 60 years old. I'm 8 years older. He was only 60 years old, but that strenuous life, I think, finally caught up with that frail little boy back when he was 7 or so. Added to that, the death of Quinton. I think he felt responsible. How could you be a Roosevelt son and not go? How could you not do that? For his children, 2 of them died during World War II. I think Ted died in 1944. He was a general at the time. He was the oldest man on D-Day. Look at my notes. Kermit also died, although Kermit committed suicide. Roosevelt's children were not, for the most part, happy, at least the boys. Ted always felt that he should be president of the United States, and when he was going to go up against Franklin Roosevelt, his cousin Eleanor sided with, obviously, with her husband Franklin, and would not back him. It was kind of a sad story there. Kermit became an alcoholic like his uncle Elliot. Elliot Roosevelt, Theodore's brother, was an alcoholic. Eleanor was mostly raised by Theodore and Edith. Like I said, it was Edith who gave, or it was Theodore who gave Eleanor away at the wedding with Franklin. Clinton was already dead, died in World War I. Archie served in World War II, World War I and World War II, and he made it through. However, he became a fanatic anti-communist after the war. He ended up being one of the founding members of the John Birch Society, spoke out against the civil rights movement at the same time that Ethel was being very active in the civil rights movement. He died in 1979. Ethel died in 1977. Edith had died in 1948. The survivor was Alice. Alice, who had always been the unwanted child, the child of the other wife. Although that's not fair to Edith, because Edith really became a mother to Alice. But Alice was always the wild one. It really was true when Teddy said, "I can be president of the United States, or I can control Alice. I can't possibly do both." That was pretty much true. And she went on to die, I think, in 1980 at the age of 96. She was a Washington institution. Her most famous line is, "If you can't say anything nice about anybody, come sit by me." So, anybody have questions?
Right here.
Are there still descendants living today?
I'm sorry?
Are there still descendants living today?
There are still descendants living. I think that there's none of the children are alive, of course. I think that there's one of the grandchildren. Alice's granddaughter is still alive. There's a few of them out there. The Roosevelt family, and it was the same way with Franklin too. The kids, you don't hear much about the Franklin Roosevelt kids, and you didn't hear a lot of, you heard a lot about Eleanor, obviously, but you didn't hear a lot about Teddy's kids either. How do you follow an act like that, either one of them, Teddy or Franklin. How do you follow that? But yeah, there are still some descendants around.
Before everybody starts leaving, I'm Larry Mount, trustee in the village of Round Lake Beach. And on behalf of the mayor, the board of trustees, and the Round Lake Beach Civic Center Foundation, we just want to give a big applaud for Theodore Roosevelt and for being here today. If you've got more questions, you'll be able to answer them. But I've got something I've got to tell about storytelling, because not only has Mr. Dawson worked with our foundation and our civic board here, he does our cemetery walk. He's been fantastic for me to get to know this past year. Not only is he a former teacher or storyteller, he's also a 51-year Eagle Scout.
Yes.
51 years he's been an Eagle Scout. So the stories he has told today has really meant a lot to me. I was raised in the Panama Canal Zone. I have been there where Teddy Roosevelt dug out. I did my Eagle Scout project at the old French Canal when I got my Eagle Scout 51 years ago. So it's been a pleasure hearing that. Also, when he mentions President Taft, I can always say I have had lunch many times with President Taft. He is buried in Greenville, Tennessee, and right below the cemetery is a Dairy Queen. And I go visit my friends in Greenville, Tennessee, and we always have to go to Dairy Queen to get a pork barbecue, because I can say I've had lunch with President Taft, who's buried. So again, Mr. Dawson, thank you so much.
Questions, I'll be here for a few minutes. If you want pictures, I can stand there. Pictures. Thanks to my timekeeper,